ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
One of the world's most important shipping routes is under threat. Following a series of drone and missile attacks on vessels passing through the Bab-al-Mandab strait off the coast of Yemen, commercial ships are now being diverted and a US-led maritime protection force is moving into the region. The Houthi rebels are behind the attacks, but who are they? And could their maritime showdown affect the Israel-Gaza war? Dr. Elisabeth Kendall specialises in Arab and Islamic studies at the University of Cambridge. Dr. Kendall, good morning.
Good morning.
Who are the Houthis and how have they come into power in Yemen?
The Houthis, well, they take their name from a former leader, Hussein al-Houthi. He was killed in 2004. But despite taking that name, they're not a tribe. They are a political, military and religious grouping that emanated in the north of Yemen. Now, religion does play an important role in their identity politics, and indeed their political name is Ansar Allah, the partisans of Allah. And they're mainly, although not exclusively, Zaydi, which it's a branch of Shiism. But it's not the kind of Shiism that's in Iran. It's much closer to more moderate kind of Sunnism. Now, the important thing to know here is that their mobilization actually began in the early 90s, in the early 1990s, and that was to end their, as they perceived it, cultural, political, economic, religious marginalization. And they'd never really settled into the Yemeni state. So to cut a long story short, here we are with a group of so-called rebels, but a group that's grown ever more powerful, who have been at on and off war now for 20 years and have developed a taste for power. And it's now, I think, inconceivable that there could be a solution in Yemen, which is still in a state of civil war, without making the Houthis some part of a power-sharing government, unpalatable as that might seem.
Who are their most powerful allies in the region, Dr. Kendall?
Their most powerful ally is, without doubt, Iran. And the Houthis could not be operating at this level with undertaking these kinds of attacks in the Red Sea and lobbing missiles towards Eilat, towards Israel, if they weren't being trained and armed by Iran. And this is something that's happened increasingly during the ongoing civil war. And the latest civil war began when the Houthis took over the capital in 2014. So they've had over 9 years of being increasingly driven into the orbit of Iran.
Peace talks between the Saudis and Houthi officials resumed in April this year. How sensitive is that at the moment in the attacks that are unfolding and international reaction to those attacks?
Well, the peace talks that are ongoing with Saudi Arabia do increase the Houthis' leverage here because, the Saudis are very keen to exit the Yemen war. So they don't want anything getting in the way of that. Now, if the Houthis were, for example, designated as a foreign terrorist organization, again, by the United States, this is something that happened previously at the end of the Trump era, then it would make it very difficult to be in peace talks with them. And the Saudis do want to get out of the Yemen war. I also think it's worth saying that even though Saudis made some kind of agreement with Iran earlier this year, that's not going to help too much either, because although the Houthis are beholden to Iran, they're not a direct proxy. Iran doesn't have direct command and control over the Houthis. So it's really a situation where the Houthis hold a lot of the cards and we have very little leverage. The West, Israel, America has very little leverage over them.
What sort of reaction have we seen from other countries in the Middle East to the attacks that are being carried out by the Houthis?
Good question. There wasn't much interest in the attacks that the Houthis were carrying out inside Yemen, nor indeed earlier during the war when they launched over 1,000 missiles at Saudi Arabia and then also a couple of years ago at the United Arab Emirates. But now that international shipping is being impacted, suddenly there is global interest on the Houthis. So it's really done what they wanted. It's attracted international and considerable media attention on not just their cause, but the Palestinian cause. And there's going to be a lot more pressure now to try to accommodate the Houthis in the sense of finding a way to tamp down their aggression, because what they're doing is now impacting us, and it's not just a faraway struggle.
Dr. Kendall, just finally and briefly, in developing news overnight, in an hour-long speech, the top leader of Yemen's Houthi rebels threatened to target US warships if attacks were launched against Yemen. This is after the US announced its international coalition to head in. How likely would it be that the Houthis go through with that threat?
Good question. I mean, the Houthis are nothing if not belligerent, and we often hear very bellicose statements from them. But I suspect that they don't want to provoke direct war. Their attacks have been carefully calibrated to be just in that sweet spot where they get enough attention internationally, but not enough to provoke direct war. And that's because they are on the cusp of having some kind of deal with Saudi Arabia whereby Saudi exits the Yemen war. Why would they risk that by provoking an all-out war in the region that could prove existential for them? So I think, in short, the Houthis are going to attempt to steer a line that causes maximum disruption, but, without provoking all-out war. The major risk now will be accidents or miscalculation on their part.
Dr. Kendall, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Find more great ABC RN stories that take you beyond the headlines on the ABC Listen app.